Coming up on today's episode, we kick off our mini-series taking a deeper dive into the world of the West Visayan Big Five and the awesome work of the Talarak Foundation. Welcome to the Conservationists Assemble, the podcast that seeks to unite with Earth's mightiest conservation heroes to raise the profile of our planet's most threatened species by putting the spotlight on the fantastic work of both in situ and ex situ conservation organisations and highlighting the link between them, as well as asking those important questions of what more can and needs to be done. I am your host, Captain Conservation, aka Johnny Bloxham, and I am inviting you to join the ranks of the Conservationists Assemble community as we take the fight to Earth's biggest villain and my arch nemesis, extinction. This episode is focused on the Visayan Warty pig, the second largest mammal in the West Visayas and a species that has an awesome Mohican that would give David Beckham a run for his money. I've teamed up with Matt Ward of the Talarak Foundation, who has all of the intel required to inform us on what it is going to take to defeat extinction. Will you join the fight? Matt, thank you for joining me on the podcast today. How are you doing?
Really good, thanks. Yes, busy day, but always is in conservation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to hear you're doing well, and I'm certainly excited to discuss the world of the Visayan Warty pig as we start our journey into learning about the West Visayan Big Five. But before we start discussing the work of the Talarak Foundation in conservation, could you please just introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yes, so my name is Matt Ward. Not doctor yet, but on the way there. I am the executive director of the Talarak Foundation. We're an NGO in the Philippines, and I run that NGO with my colleagues, most of which are Filipino. Well, actually, everyone else is Filipino. But I myself have a long experience, more than a decade or so now, in conservation around the world. So that's what I'm here doing in Talarak now, is trying to help bring that conservation experience to these big five species.
Fantastic. And yeah, we certainly look forward to hearing more about your experiences and your journey on the way to becoming a doctor a bit later on. But yeah, as we mentioned earlier, we're here to talk about the Visayan Warty pig today. So just before we get into the work of the organisation, could you just tell us a little bit about the Visayan Warty pig, please?
Yeah. So the Visayan Warty pig is um, a basic sort of bio. It's part of the Suidae family. It's a pig. It's relatively closely related to domestic pigs, so it's part of the genus Sus, but it is endemic to the Philippines. In fact, the Philippines has four endemic pigs that we have currently classified. There may be another couple coming through that are going to be classified soon. And the Visayan Warty pig is one of those. And it is endemic not just to the Philippines, but to specifically just a couple of islands. So the Philippines is broken up into many islands. It's an archipelagic country. And as the country goes, there's high levels of endemicity, as you expect from island nations. But because each island is quite far away and they're quite distinct with their biogeography, a lot of the species that live on those islands have become endemic to those regions. So that's the same with our Visayan Warty pig, where currently it's only found on two islands in the Philippines, which is quite amazing. You know, it's used to be found on approximately five, but now it's only on these two. Um, and it's otherwise pretty much like other pigs. It's a generalist in terms of its diet and habitat. It can live in a lot of different habitats. It prefers forested landscapes. It prefers sort of relatively close forest away from humans, but it can survive in much more degraded landscapes. They're very, very intelligent, very industrious. They're able to survive in a lot of different areas. And that's also partly down to their diet. They eat almost anything. So they will eat animals, dead animals, and small live animals if they can catch them. eggs, bones, but also a variety of vegetation. They love fruits. They love fresh shoots and grasses and flowers and things like that. And in the really harsh times, they will just eat dry leaves, they'll eat grasses, they'll eat tree bark, whatever nutrients they can get hold of.
So, would you say then that A, they're, quite an adaptable species, but B, with the range of the diet that they have and that ability to survive in degraded habitat, that actually, for the degraded habitat they are found in, they're providing quite a service?
Exactly. Yeah, I think they are very adaptable species, not just in their physiology, but also in their intelligence. They're quite a social species, and I think we might talk a little bit more about this later, some of their sort of key features. But as you just said, they provide a lot of really important resources to the environment they live in. So a lot of pigs, wild pigs, are considered environmental engineers. They play very important roles in their ecosystems. Um, and it's part of their biology and part of their ecology. Not only are they eating fruits and then pooping them out and dispersing them and eating seeds and things like this, eating certain nuts, which they're able to break open, that then other animals can get to those seeds, and those nuts themselves can germinate because there's access to water and light. Um, but they dig a lot. This is a very classic behavior for pigs, the rooting, the digging things up. And that's a really important part of an environment's ability to have young seeds, young saplings and trees have more access to light, have rotational nutrition, all of that dead layers of the topsoil, rotting logs, and things like that. They dig through all of that and they're able to aerate the soil, get all the nutrients cycled through. Bacteria and invertebrates are able to cycle through the environment because of their activities. And the wallows they make, another classic pig thing is making wallows, they actually serve as really important temporary water systems for animals. So if you can imagine certain landscapes where you have running rivers and streams, but when those streams and rivers might be quite far away, or during the dry seasons when those streams and rivers dry up and they get smaller, those wallows can act as refuges of pockets of water for animals to drink from. And people don't realize just how important those are.
Thank you for kind of highlighting the niche that the pig plays in their wider ecosystem. And we obviously are going to get onto kind of the classifications and the threats of the Visayan Warty pig in the future, or yeah, further in the episode. But just say, for example, if the Visayan Warty pig, or kind of pigs in general, were removed from this environment, are there any other animals that would pick up and make that ecological, or fill that ecological role, or kind of are they the only animal that can do that?
Yeah, not really. And that's one of those interesting features that we often see, especially with island biogeography, that species sometimes fill a niche that they don't do in the mainland, or their sister species in other parts don't do, because something has gone missing and they have to occupy that niche. The Visayan water pig and lots of pigs in general, the niches they occupy are sort of filled around their biology. And, we know that pigs are quite rotund, they're very strong, they do a lot of digging, got very wiry hair, so they're very good at getting muddy and getting through dense vegetation, making tunnels, making trails in areas where other animals can't go through. And if you lose them, you lose all those features. For example, in the Visayan Islands, we also have the Visayan spotted deer, which I believe we'll talk about at a later date. And the Visayan spotted deer, it lives in the same place. It eats very much the same food in terms of a lot of the vegetation, the fruits, the leaves, and stuff like that. However, it doesn't make the wallows. It cannot cycle through the nutrients like the pigs does. It can't break through the vegetation the way the pigs do. It can't influence the forest as much as the pigs. And so there is certainly a level of influence that only the pigs really can bring in. In other countries, you will have other species that may be able to have some influence. Some of the anteater species, Things like in Africa, you have the aardvark, which can do similar things to the pigs. But here in the Philippines, there's nothing else that would be able to fill that role.
So yeah, certainly then, obviously we want to be saving the Visayan Warty pigs and all threatened species, but it's great to know that they have a purpose and there's a reason why we should be trying to save them. And yeah, correctly, kind of you mentioned the Visayan spotted deer, absolutely a future episode there as we work through the West Visayan Big Five. So the Visayan Warty pig being the second largest mammal on this group of islands, is it safe to say that there are no real natural threats from predators to them?
Yeah, mostly once a pig is adult sized, there's nothing really that they have to fear other than humans. The only threat that could face these pigs, even as adults, would be pythons.
Sure.
So the Philippines has got large reptiles. They don't have the classical large carnivores like there are no large cats, there are no large dogs, no wolves, no tigers or lions or anything like this. Um, and to a large extent, one of the apex predators of the country is the Philippine eagle, which is an amazing species, one of the largest eagles in the world. But and as soon as you have a piglet that gets to about 6 months old, they're not a threat anymore. However, pythons and the reticular python, especially, which is the species found in the Philippines, can get to 9, 10 meters long. And a python of that size can pretty much eat anything on these islands. Um, Fortunately for the pigs, unfortunately for the pythons, they rarely get that size anymore because it takes a very long time to do. And by the time they're anywhere near that size, they've been spotted by people and persecuted. So realistically, there are no predators for an adult water pig. And this is something that you can see in their behavior. It's interesting that with some species, similar species in mainland Asia, such as the Suscrofa, the wild boar, which we have across Europe and Asia, or species in Africa, such as the warthogs, you see a lot more alertness. You see a lot more sort of the general social behavior is about staying aware of your surroundings and being safe in a group. Whereas with the Visayan Warty pigs, there's a lot more interesting characteristics coming out about bonding and about social dynamics being more around learning than around being safe. Because once they're in this group, they're safe. They don't have to worry about predators. You know, and it is amazing to see that these animals in the wild, the only threat they have is humans. So when they're out in the forest, they can actually be quite free and move around quite well because they don't have to worry about any other species.
Yeah, that is really interesting, and I'm sure, yeah, when you are maybe doing those research uh, topics on them, yeah, it's certainly quite nice to see because that is certainly a rarity that you don't have to worry about any natural predators, of course. So you've mentioned the kind of the social ecology of these animals. How has that shifted in kind of recent years with perhaps the reduction in threats?
Um, Honestly, we don't know because no one has studied this pig until us. It's one of the sort of tragedies with a lot of these species, and it's not just this, a lot of Filipino species haven't been studied very well because they were thought to be common, they were thought to be sort of everywhere, and it's only when they get to a really low population and they're endangered or critically endangered, people take notice. They're like, we don't see them anymore. We should probably see what's going on. And even then, conservation action tends to be more around protecting area, protecting rather than discovering what they are all about and identifying the species, behaviors, ecology, and understanding them better. So there's very little known about this species generally. Our foundation and my background in particular is all about behavior ecology and researching animals themselves because that's the best way to conserve them is understand what they need and what they are and how they do what they do so that you can understand what they need to survive long term. So it's only really through our studies that we've seen this. And unfortunately, because they are so rare, we have very little data to go on with in terms of wild populations. The wild pigs are spread far and wide within these island groups that they live in. They're in relatively low densities because they get hunted because of the amount of forest loss, so they get pushed to these extreme areas. We have some data from wild populations, but most of our data on social behavior come from captive bred pigs that have been released into a protected reserve. So we've given them time to adapt and adjust. And of course, we've got lots of wild baby pigs living in this reserve. And so they've grown up in a truly wild setting, but the adults were raised in a captive scenario. And so there is a hint of we need to take a pinch of salt from this because these animals have already had some habituation. But I think even from that point, the social behavior that we have seen indicates that they're a very tight knit group. You can take pigs that have never met each other before, and when they meet in the forest, they're able to communicate in a way that I've never seen in other animals, like communication that we see with dolphins and primates, verbal communication and physical communication. That it's not for a specific purpose. Classically, when we have individuals communicate with each other in I don't know how to phrase this well, but in a lesser intelligent species that we typically classify, dolphins and primates are up here and everything else is down here, that kind of stuff. So even with dogs or with wildcats, there's always a reason for communication. And it's fighting over territory or resources, it's trying to mate, or it's a relationship that is already established, a kin relationship. You're a sister, a father, a daughter, or something like this. But with these pigs, complete strangers can meet up and they start chatting. And there doesn't seem to be any particular reason why they are communicating. They're not aggressive. They're not competing. They're not trying to breed because it's two males. They're not related by any way that we know because we've taken them from different breeding groups from different locations. But they're able to still create this kind of social bond, which we see with those higher intelligence species like primates and dolphins and children, humans. And so this is the thing that really fascinated me, is that this pig species is way beyond what we've ever given credit for a pig to do. Um, they're also a pig species we know that uses tools. It's the only wild pig species that's been documented to use tools. In our captive centers, we have seen them testing electric fences with sticks, and they place a stick to drop on the electric fence to see if it's live or not. We have seen them use tools to dig for things, which is kind of crazy because that, in effect, is using a tool to play because they don't need tools to dig. They're excellent diggers themselves. Their snouts and their tusks are designed for that. So they will use flattened sticks to dig up food just as a way to make their feeding time more extravagant. So I consider that a form of play. Um, but we have also seen them creating shelters. We actually have documentation of them creating these sort of cave-like structures with multiple entrances, and we've now got it on two species, our Visayan Warty pigs and their cousins, the Mindoro Warty pig, which is found on the island of Mindoro, also in the Philippines, creating almost identical structures out of grass and vegetation. And we have found lots of these structures now. And when we have tested these structures to see what they could be about, we have seen that the internal cave of this structure has a more consistent temperature than the outside. It is cooler in the day, it is warmer at night. It is waterproof because we pour water on it and you're bone dry when you're in the center of this structure. And we think it's a way for them to develop not a nest for breeding, but just a place where they can relax that is away from the elements. So if that's not a sign of intelligence, I don't know what is. They built a house. And this is the first time we've seen any kind of evidence of this in pigs at all. So yeah, this pig, when we talk about it being intelligent and being social, way beyond anything you can imagine of what a pig would typically do, and in the realms of dolphins and primates that we never thought were imaginable.
Yeah, that sounds so cool. It's almost like they're kind of rewriting the book of what we've known about intelligence, and it, like you say, kind of they've got no. If we're following kind of that historical model of behavior assessment, they've got no right to be kind of two males having that. So yeah, certainly at the very least, a kind of an emotional intelligence. But now, yeah, it seems
Yeah,
like there's a practical intelligence too.
yeah, yes. Um, and it's amazing to see this also now with two of these species in the Philippines. And the more we study them, I'm sure we're going to find more intricate details around it. I actually, one of my PhD plans is to try and identify some of their language because their vocal communication is so intricate. Like it's at a level that you wouldn't think of in most animals, the way they can communicate vocally with each other. But you sort of raised a point earlier, which I think is fundamental to some of this intelligence. I think it may come down a lot to the lack of large predators. Because with some of these other pig species around Asia and around Africa and Europe and such, they don't have the ability to create complicated social structures for fun. They don't have the ability to set up a big enclosed structure that they can nest in at night and they can sleep in because there is always a threat of a predator. They have to do things for survival. They are intelligent to survive. But these pigs don't have that need. They don't have those predators. They've never had that predator, at least for several thousand years. So when you have a highly intelligent animal that now has free reign to do what it wants, it can do amazing things.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, certainly look forward to kind of seeing what else they just happen to astonish us with going forward. So I think now it's probably time to introduce the villain of our story in terms of the threats that are there. And obviously we mentioned that they are all human based. So could you please outline some kind of the key issues that the Visayan Warty pig is facing, and I suppose then the key challenges of the Talarak Foundation?
Yeah. So as we mentioned earlier, this is a critically endangered species. We might not have said that specifically, but it's critically endangered. It's one of the rarest pigs in the world. And it is only found on two islands. It used to be found on 5 or 6 islands. Now it's restricted to two. So already they have been lost from those other islands. The main drivers of this, as you'd expect with most wildlife, is habitat loss and direct persecution. Um, Whilst they are very adaptable and they can survive in many different habitats, the problem is not just that the habitat is decreasing or being eradicated in total, it's that the new habitats that are coming up, which are agricultural habitats, degraded, human influenced natural landscapes, they are now very human habituated, and which means that when you have this wild animal which is encountering humans a lot more, that is causing problems. So it's not just that the habitat is gone and so it's not got any food and it dies. It's that the new habitats that it is surviving in and struggling in are also bringing those other pressures with it. Being a pig, of course, it is delicious. Pork is one of the main industries of Asian food. The Philippines is no different. In fact, because of the Spanish colonization, pork became even more of a thing, with ham and roasted pig being a celebratory dish. So you have this free source of pork in your mountains, and that was, of course, a big problem for the pigs. But one of the biggest drivers, at least historically, um, that was sort of overlooked wasn't so much the poaching for food, which has always been an issue, but not to the level that would cause extinction. But it is the conflict with agriculture. Now we know historically, like we're both from the UK, and a lot of the Western world have these phrases. You're eating like a pig, which is to eat a lot of food and also be quite messy when you eat. Um, and this is part of the issue that we have with even wild pigs when it comes to agriculture. They like a lot of food. They like fatty foods. They like sweet foods. They like things which are highly nutritious and very tasty. And when you have an island which has limited land space, and that land space is being used for personal and commercial agriculture, such as root crops like cassava, sweet potato, or sugarcane, or ginger and garlic, and these kinds of things, those are the kinds of crops that these pigs will love to eat. And if you've gotten rid of their natural food and you've cut down their natural habitats and you've planted these delicious treats right in front, they're going to come in and they're going to start eating those crops. And it's not just that they come in and they take one sweet potato back into the forest. They come in and they're biting and nibbling and digging up half a field, you know? So because of this threat from the pigs on the agricultural industry and personal agriculture as well, which is the big issue here. We're not just talking about mass produced, large scale agricultural farms. We're talking about small plots that are the sole income for communities living in these areas. The pigs get persecuted. And it's not a case of if I see a pig in my farm, I'll shoot it. It's a case of I need to go out and kill all the pigs in the area to prevent them from being a threat. And that's where these die-offs and this extinction threat really came about. It's this case of the pigs being seen as pests. And what do we do to pests? We eradicate them. We don't let them become a problem. We get rid of them first. And so this is where the main driver of the persecution and the threat to the pigs came from. Um, Luckily, they are resilient, they are intelligent, and adaptable, and so they are able to do what they can to avoid humans, and that's why they are still here, just about. Other species would have been wiped out by now on some of those smaller islands. That's what happened. They just got overrun and they got wiped out. But on these two remaining islands where they are surviving, there's enough natural landscape that they can retreat away from the people and away from the agriculture, and they're holding on in those pockets. Um, but there's no opportunity for them to expand because now all of that former forest has been cut down and replaced with agriculture. And so you're dealing with islands of forest surrounded by death, basically, for the pigs. And that's where this big challenge occurs. The other big challenge and the other villain, as you put it very nicely, to the pigs right now is disease. And I don't know if you've covered this in any of your other episodes, but there is a disease spreading across the world right now called African swine fever virus. This is a virus, it's not a novel virus, it's been around for a long time. It's endemic in Africa, so it's found there um, sort of consistently, and it has a life cycle with African pigs, which doesn't kill them because it's a virus that lives within them and lives within ticks within their burrows. So this virus lives happily in these species in Africa. However, when it came to Asia, in approximately, I think it was 2018, 2019, this virus spread like a wildfire because the Asian pigs are not too dissimilarly related to African pigs and domestic pigs in particular in Africa, which were the ones who took the virus from the wild pigs as the domestic pig stock, and then that meat and those pigs were sent outside, and that's how the virus spread. And this virus, when it hit the Asian pigs, they had no immunity to it. They had no way of resisting, and it decimated. And it has been since 2019. So we have been losing domestic and wild pig populations across Asia. And now frighteningly, it's entered Europe. And so Eastern Europe is facing consequences of this virus already across wild boar populations and domestic pig populations. The Visayan Warty pig is extremely vulnerable to this for a few reasons. One, because we know that this virus is fatal to the pig. We were unfortunate that when the virus hit the Philippines and it came to Negros Island, where we are based, one of our breeding centers, we have two breeding centers, one of our breeding centers did get infected, and we lost all the pigs in a space of 12 days. It wiped them out. There was no hope, no resistance, no nothing. It just came in, wiped everything out. Since then, we have really upped our biosecurity to the nth level. You know, we're like Fort Knox, cryo lab, trying to keep this virus away from our remaining pig stock. But if you think as well to the wild pigs, these fragmented island populations in these little forest patches surrounded by agriculture, by people, by domestic pigs, all it takes is for some tainted meat, because you don't need a live pig to pig transmission. It can be meat, just an infected pig that is slaughtered or dies of its own, and then a piece of that meat, tiny little piece of meat, goes into the wild. For more than 3 months, that meat will be able to hold the virus. And as we mentioned, warty pigs naturally eat anything, including carcasses and meat. So if a warty pig ate that meat, now the virus is in a live host again, and it infects that pig. Being a social species, it goes and it meets with other warty pigs and it spreads the virus through direct contact. And you can have an entire population wiped out within weeks. And unfortunately, we are starting to see that happen in our warty pigs. Not the Visayan warty pig, that we know of yet. We are studying the wild populations now to try and identify outbreaks and try and identify the impact. But from its sister, the Philippine warty pig, we have seen massive population die-offs, hundreds of animals dying off because of this virus. So we still have that previous pressure of humans. Actually, it's worse now because not only do people think that they're pests for their crops, now they think they're disease vectors for their domestic pigs. But we also now have this virus, which is causing devastating impacts across the country. And those two things may be enough to completely wipe out some of these species. And that's what Talarak is really focusing on. Our major focus right now for the Visayan Warty pig is conserving genetic makeup as much as possible within our captive centers and educating and mitigating the virus spread in communities in the wild, trying to prevent as much as possible this virus spreading in the wild, which is very hard. You know, COVID showed us that it's very hard to prevent a virus spreading when people don't want to follow biosecurity regulations. But we do what we can, try and mitigate as much as possible. There are no vaccines, there's no cure, there's no nothing that you can do after the fact. So it has to be a preventative measure. And then on the other side of things with the pest issue, again, it's more education. It's more communicating with the farmers, with the landowners, and trying to have them realize the value these pigs bring to the environment, the knock-on effect it has on their own agricultural land. You know, these pigs help maintain soil health. They help maintain microbial health. And when you lose that kind of stuff, there's this trickle down into the agricultural lands that now your agricultural land, your soil doesn't have the microbes, it doesn't have the nutrient cycle it used to. And so you get poorer yield and you end up having less and less agricultural product. So there are direct implications of having these pigs disappear for agriculture. And we're also trying to figure out ways of keeping pigs out of farms, but we're finding that's very difficult. This intelligence again is coming to bite us in the butt a little bit because every time we think of a way to keep the pigs out of the farm, they figure out a way past that deterrent. But we're still working on it, and we're still fighting.
Yeah, it's bit of an arms race, I suppose, in the sense that you come out with a solution and then they come out with something to overcome it, and that's obviously just how evolution, how we got to the point where we are today with a lot of these species. And
Yeah.
certainly quite scary to hear about the virus. It kind of puts it all into perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. The Talarak Foundation has actually taken on another project with one of the other species, the Mindoro water pig that I mentioned briefly earlier. We are now working with that species as well because it's also under massive threat, similar to the Visayans. It's really restricted, only one island where this species is surviving. And people in the Philippines don't care about pigs in general. Pigs are always overlooked. You know, they're one of the unsung heroes of the forest. Nobody cares about pigs. And so when you have a disease that has the potential to wipe them out, people think, oh no, my poor pork,
Yeah.
but they don't think about the wild pigs. They don't think about the impact it's going to have on these. And they haven't even got the idea and they don't have the knowledge about what it's going to mean for the environment. How much it's going to impact the environment when these animals go. So yes, we are championing the pigs at Talarak. It's the species that I am doing my PhD with. It's a species that or a family actually, the whole Philippine pig family that we are trying to preserve and make it an ambassador. Because only then will it actually get some attention that can help it be restored and help its population bounce back.
Absolutely, and that is what it's all about, and that's certainly kind of the focus for this podcast, is raising the profile of all species. Certainly some need it, or a lot need it more than others. So now that we've introduced the villain of the story, I think this is an appropriate time, Matt, to put a bookmark in this chapter of our conversation, and we will pick up in another episode to discuss the conservation organisations and actions, and also your career and background for the Visayan Warty pig. As always, a huge thank you to you, the Conservationists Assemble community, for tuning in and supporting the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode and wish to join the fight to stack the odds in conservation's favour, then please share this episode with your family and friends and interact with the podcast by sharing your favourite photos and videos of the Visayan Warty pig or any of your favourite species. You can also send in your favourite memories from a time at your favourite zoo or experiencing nature firsthand. And don't forget, you can have your say by expressing species, organisations or specific guests you would wish to have on the podcast. You can do all of these things by emailing conservationists@outlook.com or by messaging on Facebook and Instagram. Tune in next time for part 2 of this episode on the Visayan Warty pig and the Talarak Foundation with Matt Ward. Until next time, this is Captain Conservation signing off, over and out.